First off, I just want to say Merry Christmas and hope that were super surprised by your gift. So I feel like a sense of ownership that because I am trying to get you to quilt, that I need to be involved in your learning process. So first thing I wanted to do is kind of talk about how I view quilting, and so a lot of this video is going to be audio. So, and also kind of like what inspires me and why I think that quilting is healing. I think it's um, the best part of slow sewing. That's kind of like a therapeutic thing that people call it, where you use sewing as a way to meditate. So, anyway, so this is the thing that I enjoy the most about quilting and in my research of traditional ways to quilt, and the kind of like the idea behind it. So this is to me this is really powerful. So quilting really started. It started like a long time ago. People in all countries and cultures have made some variation of the quilt. But in America, because quilting has become an American folk art form, it's almost uniquely American in the way that the quilting art is. And so, what what it was is that I read this article about um, people who, like textiles and domestic crafts and things. And this article talked about how women of yesteryear, they would look around them and they would use pieces of this and pieces of that. And they would kind of cobble together this thing and then put it together really creatively. Um, to make it beautiful, because maybe they didn't have a lot and they were living on the frontier and all they had was like this little thing, and they wanted to make it as beautiful as possible. And so they would gather things that had been worn out, or maybe like flour sacks or feed sacks, and um, they would turn it into something um, useful, something beautiful. And the idea of taking the concept of taking something that is refuse, basically, it's rubbish, it's broken, it's damaged, um, and then cutting it in a certain way and then re-sewing it back together to make something beautiful, it gives me chills. Like, it is such an amazing concept. um to even like the spirituality of that, and the religious nature of um, taking something broken, something worn out, something used, abused, um, and cutting out the good parts and making something beautiful, um, is a wonderful concept. And so I am very much inspired by that, by looking around me and using what I can to make something tangible and something utilitarian and useful, because it makes me feel useful. It makes me feel like I matter. It makes me feel um, better, I guess, because I am making something that has value. Um, and so I think that's a really important thing to think about. Um, so that's a huge inspiration to me, especially with quilting. A lot with sewing too. That sense of like pride and just motherliness, to be able to make my kids clothes or make them a blanket. It's just so productive, and it is so basic, and it's so like primal almost. really getting back to the roots, and using sewing, especially something like quilting where you're metaphorically taking broken and bad pieces, and making something beautiful. It's it's such a beautiful metaphor, and you can stitch yourself back together. It's really beautiful. Um, so I just wanted to really start this first video with that, and then so now we're gonna talk actually about quilts. So first off, like, let's manage our expectations. It's really good to know what makes a museum quality quilt. You will probably never make one of those. But you can strive to always have your points matched, to always have the stitching correctly, and you're stitching 12 inches or 12 stitches per inch, and you're doing all the right stuff, and that's really, really good. But set your standards a little low. And I don't mean that because you're new. I'm just saying in general. So that's the other thing about sewing, and especially like sewing with quilts and things, is that it is an exercise in not being perfect. Um, it's hard to release that, to release not being perfect. Um, and that's like another like beautiful thing about it, is just like, hey, I messed up here. Like, look, I'll show you something that I did. And you just have to kind of let it go. You can't dwell on it. So you will see this has directionality, right? You have all of your little animals this way. You have all this going this way, this way, this way. Whoops. I didn't turn it right. And I had already sewn all this together before I realized it. So what am I going to do? Just take it apart? No one's ever going to see that. You wouldn't be able to see that if I hadn't pointed it out to you. So this is a quilt up that we'll probably talk about a lot, but this is something that I've been working on. So part of like the whole like refuse and making something beautiful and new. So this is actually made. The template that I use is a 1.5 inch square. So each one of these is 1 inch. We'll talk about that later when I talk about seam allowance. And so what inspired me for this quilt, is that I really, really wanted to use the smallest template I could find, so that I could use the smallest scraps that I had. So I actually keep a box under my sewing table, and it is just little tiny scraps, things that can't really be used for anything else, because it's just not enough to make anything out of. I mean, just really tiny. But yeah, like, what am I gonna do with this? So anyway, so I wanted to do it really, really small. Like, look how small those pieces I just pulled out of here. It's so tiny. So that's why it is a small quilt. It is something that I can use almost to even like timeline my life, like the things that I was sewing or things I had on hand. And so this is a constant project. It will probably never be finished. But we'll also probably come back to this when we talk about design. So let's talk a little bit about terminology. I like to small piece. So this is a small piece quilt. Typically, I do not go over 2 inches square. So I don't usually go any bigger than this. I have found that if you're hand piecing a lot, you want something you can hold in your hand, real small like this. Obviously the quilt's going to grow, and like it'll be this size, and you'll have that in your hand. But working with smaller pieces, I have found with hand piecing works a little bit better. But whatever, it's your choice. And that's the thing about sewing that you've got to learn, is that it is all your choice. I can give you like the tools and like the know-how, but ultimately it is your preference. So I prefer small piece quilts. That's just what I like to do. Some people prefer to do large piece quilts or whole cloth quilts, which is where it's just, there's no piecing at all. It's just stitching. That's a whole cloth quilt. Um, so it's like this is called a quilt, but this is technically called a quilt top, right? Because it doesn't have the backing or the batting in it. So this is a quilt top. You'll have a layer of batting and then your backing. So that's what those terms are. Your backing, we'll get there, about what types of fabrics and things that are disputed. So this is your quilt top. Now the actual stitch of, it's called quilting. It's a type of stitch. And basically what it is you have a back, you have some kind of filler, and then you have another fabric on top. And basically what you do is you stitch together the front and back piece to hold the batting. So the best thing I can think of is like a puffy coat. You know how it kind of looks like Michelin Man? That is actually technically called a quilting stitch. So when you quilt your quilt, you're putting in all the stitches that are going to keep the quilt top, the batting, and the backing. So your backing is what's really stabilizing this whole thing. And don't worry about putting too many stitches in when you're quilting, just in general. The quilting actually makes the fabric a little bit stronger, which is interesting. So another thing that we'll talk a lot about is seam allowance. So when you sew, this is going to seem real like common sense, but until somebody explains it to you, you don't know. So you have to have seam allowance when you sew, right? Because you have to have something to sew on. Like, right? Like you need this part of the fabric. Like you can't just like magically sew one end. Like you can't do this. Right? You have to give it something. Otherwise, like first off, you could do that with a zigzag. But all it's going to do is just fray the fabric, and whatever you have is just going to vaporize. I mean, it's not going to hold it. So you need to have seam allowance. And in quilting, the seam allowance is standardized 1/4 of an inch. So everything that you cut, and we'll get there again, is you're going to have to add 1/2 an inch to each side. So this is a 2-inch square, but I had to cut out 2.5. Yeah, 2.5. So it's 2.5 here and 2.5 here. So you have to have seam allowance. And with hand piecing, you're definitely going to need a line to sew on. That's the only thing with hand piecing that's kind of cumbersome, is like after you cut out all of your pieces, you're going to have to go back and draw a line. But you're always welcome to eyeball it. I wouldn't recommend it. It doesn't take but 2 seconds to do. It's just kind of tedious. So here's some more. So the other things, trying to think of like any other terms. I can't think of anything. Most of it's tools. So the cool thing about quilting is like you really, really don't need like too many tools, which is also one of the like beauties of it, is like you could theoretically, all you need is a pair of scissors, needle, thread, and fabric. And the simplicity of that is something that's really beautiful to me. And actually is probably why I quilt the way I do. I'm super inspired by it. So you are gonna need a rotary tool. This one's one from the dollar store that someone gave me. I've never even used it. But you can get one that's like, the head's like pretty big on it. So hopefully you got a rotary tool and a mat. And you're definitely going to need those two things. If it gets hard to use your rotary blade, go ahead and change it out. You want that sharp, sharp, sharp. That's how you get super, super accurate measurements and cuts, is by that sharp, sharp blade. So you're also going to need some rulers. Again, I like small quilts. I like small pieces. I don't have big rulers. But this is generally what they look like, right? Like they have like all these like angles. So this, like, you can see, like, you can use this. Like, you can mark lines with this, and you have all of your 1/4 inch marks for like seam allowances, and you have all sorts of like marks on here on the quilting rulers that are really, really handy. Like I said, I don't use them. But this is probably my favorite ruler I've ever bought. It is a 6-inch, 1-inch ruler, and I use this all the time in everything. It's the best. I would highly suggest getting one of these. It's my favorite ruler. It's the best. So yeah, so you're gonna get all these different types of rulers. Hopefully the lady put in your like kit that like whatever she thinks that you need. Because I don't use a rotary cutter when I quilt. I'm not 100% sure like what the best rulers are gonna be for you. And so hopefully they got all that stuck in there for you. And we will go through like cutting and things. So some other things that you're going to need, especially with hand piecing and with machine, you're going to need one of these guys. This is a seam ripper. They're very, very easy to use. So let's say you like sewed a seam you didn't want to sew. You can probably find a YouTube video that really specifies. You just take this little point right here, this down here in this little loop, there's a razor right there. So this is really, really thin, and you can just kind of like slide it between your threads, hook it into this little piece right here, and it will cut the threads. So definitely going to need one of these at some point. Some other things you're going to need are a way to mark. This is a really cool one. I bet I can demonstrate on the table. Don't look at my table. It's so bad. But this has like a teeny tiny little, I don't know, like gear or something. It's like a pounce wheel. And this is full of chalk. And so it makes a very, very thin line. I'll show it to you. I don't know if you can see that. But it's like a really thin line. It's great. I love this thing. And so you have this. And again, this is your preference. We have Taylor's chalk. It works fine. Pencils. Only the wooden kind, though. The mechanical pencils don't do well. I know this from experience. But this is what I use. I just use a ballpoint pen. It's a preference. I don't care about pen marks. I don't care. It has screwed me in the past, but like I just use a ballpoint pen. I think it works on like most fabrics unless there's really dark, to which I use this. And like it works for me. It's what I like to use. You might prefer a pencil. You might prefer one of those fabric markers that disappear with heat, which are really cool. I like those too. But you just find your preference. So maybe you start with a ballpoint pen and you're like, wow, I don't like that. That doesn't come out very easily. I'm going to use a pencil. I'm going to use this. So just like start with something and then figure out what you like. Figure out what makes sense to you. You might be hearing like, Carol, I can't believe you used a ballpoint pen. Like, you should use a pencil. Just use a pencil. It's just all personal preference. So these are the rulers that I typically use. These are more templates. These are jelly roll templates. They're nice and small. And I really prefer these. Instead of like having a ruler and trying to blah, blah, blah. I just put this on the fabric and I just draw around it. Because I do cut by hand, in case you were wondering. I draw each piece individually, and I cut it by hand. I like the aesthetic. I like the tediousness of it. I like just like the real I don't know, like the slowness of it, how it slows you down, and it isn't perfect all the time. I just like it that way. So to sew, you obviously are going to need a pair of scissors at some point, especially with hand sewing, hand piecing. So you're going to need some needles. You'll see down here, right down here, it has like your size. These say applique sharps. I don't know, but I like sharps. I like number 9s. Number 10s are really good too. They're just a little thin for quilting. But I like number 9 sharps, SHARPS, long, LONG. You can get shorts, which I accidentally did one time. They're tiny. That's how long this needle is. It's so little. That was a huge mistake. So make sure you get longs. You don't want to get anything too short because you're not going to be able to hold it very well. And we will also go through all of that as well. So you're going to need thread. Let me grab some thread. So you can get all sorts of kind. This is like the stuff they have at Joann's. That's like super cheap. It's like $2. It's just a polyester thread. I mean, if you want to be real, it's not a very good thread. It's just cheap. Gutermann is one of like the best like all-purpose. It's decently strong. Typically it's a lot of like, it's a little bit more expensive, but it tends to be mostly cotton, which is good. Gutermann also sells, in case you're wondering out there, they sell 100% silk thread, and it is a dream, and it is expensive. This was like $9. So when you're hand piecing, you just need regular thread. You don't need to get quilting thread. Here's the quilting thread that I have. It is very thick, and it is wax-ish. This is also the really cheap quilting thread. You can get better quality. I think Gutermann sells some quilting threads. But there is a difference. So having something that's all polyester, something that's all cotton, different strengths. So this is going to hold it better than this. The silk is going to hold it better than the cotton. And so, again, personal preference. This one tends to tangle more. This one tends to not tangle as much. So a preference. You can go cheap. Nobody's ever going to know. It holds up like generally just as good as everything else. So, if you do use, obviously when you use thread, especially for these projects, you're going to want to have some type of thread wax. And it's really easy to use. So what you're going to do is, this one open? Yeah. So kind of opens up. You can spin it around or whatever, or not, like I do. And you'll just take your thread, and you just run it through. And this thread wax is like fine. I think it's Dritz. But you can get better waxes out there that are actually really good. and make your thread turn into butter. So the reason why you would want to do something like that is because you're going to be sewing through, a lot. You might have a longer tail. Thread tends to tangle up on you a lot. Most of the time, if you get a knot where you're not supposed to have a knot, it's just twisted in on itself. So you have to untwist it. The wax helps with that, helps limit how much that happens. And then it also makes it easier to glide through fabric. There is another thread on the market that not a lot of home sewists know about because it is a theatrical sewing thing. I've never seen this in any home fabric store. So this stuff is called silamide, and it is very strong. It's pre-waxed, so it's a wax skein. How it comes is it has like this little piece right here, and you tear that off, and then you cut it because it's all one piece. This is all one piece. You can see where I didn't cut it right there. So the thing about silamide, which is really, really cool, is that it is one solid single strand of fiber. This stuff is just like they took a bunch of wool and they like spun it together and they like made this like pretty little thing. So this, definitely polyester, but it is one fiber. So it is very, very strong, and it becomes pre-waxed, and obviously it is pre-cut. Very easy to use. If you're interested, you can get it from Manhattan Wardrobe Supply, or I'll definitely send you a link. So what you do is you pull out one thread, and it's already pre-cut to you. So you can just thread just from here. You don't have to worry about wax. You don't have to worry about what type of whatever you're getting. It's a very, very strong thread. It's actually two fibers woven together. It doesn't have a lot of weak points because it's all one piece. And so I love it. I use it for most hand sewing because it's just so convenient to have it pre-cut and pre-waxed. Highly suggest. So some other things that you're going to need. You're going to need some pins. I have my pins on a magnet. Definitely not necessary. I carry pins around in a little box, and I have my little sewing kit. So this is my sewing kit. I bought it from an antique store, and it is absolutely charming. I'm pretty sure it was handmade. So like in my sewing kit, I have pins, I have a thimble, and thimbles, I still haven't found one I love. Personal preference, buy a couple, see which one you like. So far, this is a Dritz, it's my favorite. Also, someone gave me this. It's all right. And then like I have my thread wax in here, my needles. So with hand piecing, you are going to want some type of like bag. Before I used these Clinique bags, just something to keep all your stuff in because you want to be able to make it portable. So I'm pretty sure that is all the utensils and tools. But I did want to leave you like with one more like just statement. Like, so I have that old quilt, and it's from my relatives up in Appalachia. And like this quilt is so charming because kind of just to button it all back up from the beginning. This quilt, it is not sewn well, like not at all. This isn't how you do applique. These stitches are very large, and this isn't like a well done quilt. You can tell that all the fabrics that were used they're fashion fabrics. You can tell. So when she made this, she just used what was around. Like, this is 100% a bed sheet, a flat sheet. And so is this back here, the backing. She just used, you know, an old fitted sheet that she had. And like, look at this fabric. It's amazing. It's beautiful. And it is beautiful, and it is charming, and it is so cozy and delightful. And it's delightful because it's so utilitarian. This quilt was made to be used. And it's absolutely lovely. And and when you make something for someone else or for yourself, nobody cares. Nobody cares what it looks like. Like, the minute you like hand someone something and say, I made this for you, you could give them a brown paper bag, and they will be like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I can't believe you did that. So just know that sewing and quilting, the beauty is in the imperfection, in the way you can tell that it's homemade, and that, like, you can see all of these stitches. Like, you're not supposed to be able to see this stuff. That's not an applique. That's a zigzag. You're not supposed to. And so I'm just saying, I'm trying to fix it. That there is so much beauty and so much charm in the imperfections. And don't get down on yourself if you don't do it right. Because that's not what matters. What matters is that you are making something with your own two hands that has value, and you are stitching together things to create a legacy to leave behind to your kids and your grandkids, and, you know, always be your quilt, you know. And so hopefully in the next couple of videos, I'm going to teach you how to do this. It's super easy. You don't even have to really know how to sew. So anyway, until next time.